why branding is important.
It's extremely important for any and all businesses, and oftentimes branding gets misconstrued with a lot of other things. And when you have a lot of let's just say false teachers in the market teaching what their interpretation of branding is, it damages the reputation of what people might assume it is, right? So if I just go back to like just the fundamental teachings in our industries to some of the greats, like if you look at Seth Godin, Simon Sinek, if you look at Marty Neumeier, like these guys really understand the fundamentals. Alan Dibbs, just to name a few, and there's some other amazing, incredible authors out there. And essentially, branding is like the feeling you get in your gut. That's what Marty Neumeier like says. Branding, it's a feeling, right? So if you walk into a store, a shoe store, and you see a blank shoe, and then you see a shoe exactly the same next to it, but it has a Nike swoosh, like, why are you buying that? Like, really, it's really a difficult question to answer. Like, if you have ever met someone, and I love doing this when I see people with a Rolex, you go up to them and you're like, why did you buy that Rolex? And they're like, oh, like it's, you know, it's a reminder of like how hard I work. And I'm like, bro, that's a status symbol. Oh, the only reason a guy would buy a Rolex is he's trying to flaunt his status. That's it.
Absolutely. And,
Like,
and I have, I've done like Rolex reviews, a review of my Rolex collection on YouTube before I started this podcast. Absolutely agree with you. People buy it. I mean, it might boost that person's confidence as well.
Totally.
It may kind of get them in the room of some level of importance in that room, right? Someone may notice that knows this type of stuff, but you're totally right. You're only doing it. It doesn't tell better time, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So yeah, no one buys a Rolex to tell time, right? So like, for example, I'm actually on the market looking to buy one because I know the power it has, and I'm in rooms all the time where people have them, and it's like, if you walk into, and as ridiculous as it sounds, if you walk into a room and there's successful people in that room and they see a Rolex on your wrist, it says a hell of a lot about you. That's branding, right? Why does it say a hell of a lot? Well, it becomes a symbol or a beacon of like, hey, I belong in this tribe. I'm successful and I'm a hustler and I do whatever it takes and I've earned this and I've earned my stripes in the business world, whatever that might be, right? It's like you buy things that communicate I belong in this tribe. Like, why would I buy a Harley Davidson or buy a pair of Air Jordans? Why would I go buy a Tesla? Like, I'm communicating, hey, I belong in this tribe. It's a gut feeling. So I think oftentimes when people say and lump branding into marketing or lump branding into advertising or lump branding into sales, it's like, well, it's a separate thing. It's almost like if you have an engine with 4 cylinders, branding is its own cylinder, right?
It's so distinctive. I agree with you. If you took, let's say, a Rolex Sky Dweller or Rolex Submariner or any of these Rolex watches, which you're currently looking into, as you mentioned, and you take that crown off the top of the watch, you still know that that's generally a Rolex type presentation. And then you're saying it goes deeper than that, right? It makes the person why would you spend $10,000+? That's like a feeling that they've developed for you to make you want to spend that amount of money for whatever you're getting back out of it, right? As mentioned, it's not really the accuracy of time, because from what I've even read and seen, the Rolex needs to be recalibrated every so often, while your Casio watch may be perfectly timed a year or two later. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Let's get in a little bit. There might be people watching that are like not understanding branding as the level of marketing. I personally get it because I've ran businesses. But what would you say to an entrepreneur that's younger, that's really getting into trying to get his brand across, whether it's personal brand or a company brand? How would what should they start looking at, or what are the first steps to understanding your brand and the importance of the brand?
Distinction here is like personal branding and company branding. This is debated a lot, but my opinion is they're respectably different. Play the same game, but they have different strengths and weaknesses. So for example, if you're like, okay, I'm going to play, RuneScape or like, a Lord of the Rings game, am I choosing the warrior or the wizard? Right? Personal branding and company branding, they have different strengths and weaknesses. In my opinion. So I would just make that clear distinction. So I'll kind of tell you what needs to exist in both. So I believe that, branding is kind of like an onion, right? It's got a core and it's got all these layers. So like at the surface, when you look at an onion, you can only see the top layer. Like you can't see what's in it. You know what I mean? But the nutrients in it is what gave that outer layer the strength and the ability for it to like, be as strong as it is, right? If you try to like squeeze an onion, you can't crush it because it's reinforced by all these different layers. So the internal core of your brand really comes down to 5 key principles. Number 1, who does it exist for? At the time, they're like, well, we anyone could buy this product. And it's like, okay, well, anyone could buy a pair of Nikes, Harley Davidson, anyone could go to Starbucks, anyone could buy a Rolex if they really wanted to. They could put it on finance and buy a Rolex. You know what I mean? Like anyone could buy them, but these brands don't exist for anyone. They exist for someone. That's branding. It's a key distinction, is like, who does it exist for? A Rolex exists so that predominantly a man could buy a status. A Harley Davidson exists so someone could express that they love freedom. Starbucks actually exists for the white collar person who lives in a city. Sure, grandma, grandpa, students, and everyone else can go to Starbucks. They're welcome to. But their marketing technology, and it actually stipulates this in their marketing, like we exist in like districts where there's a lot of blue collar employees that work at law firms or what have you that like want to get 5-6 coffees a day. Back to the onion. One of the principles at the core of your onion, of your branding, is like, who the hell do you exist for? Okay, so like in Nike's case, we exist predominantly for athletes or those that want to feel like they're on the pursuit or a journey like an athlete, right? If you go back to the origins of Nike at the beginning, it was hardcore only for runners. Then a few other sports. Then it kind of opened up to general sports. Now, some of their marketing is like anyone can pursue greatness. So now they've got, monopoly in the mind of the world that Nike's this cool thing. They can kind of dilute themselves. But at the very beginning, at the very precipice of you building your company, you should probably like tilt right into a specific hardcore thing. And I think generalize later, but like at least niche in the beginning, my opinion.
You can't be too broad. You're not going to capture any audience potentially and spend your advertising dollars, or even, your plan would be too broad. It wouldn't be very distinct. But number 2, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and just to I guess like put a stamp on that, it's like if you target everyone, you target no one. We love brands that represent something, that stand for something, have an opinion. And you could say, well, what about Amazon? They exist for everyone. Well, it's like, okay, but like, there are rule breakers. But most of the time, if you're starting up, you can't start up with the whole market.
Amazon exists for me and a bunch of stay-at-home moms and that love shopping, because I have a problem with it. But I agree with you.
Yeah, but people throw these arguments back. They're like, what about Amazon? What about Coca-Cola? I'm like, yeah, but like, is your law firm like that's in a city that's surrounded by like, like blue collar, like people coming to you for like, corporate law, like, or if you're starting a product to sell supplements, everyone at the gym, or is it for the yoga instructor, or is it for the gym bro, or is it for the lifestyle fitfluencer? Number 2 is like really understanding like, what is your specialty? Like what makes you, what gives you an X factor? Like what's your sizzle? I try to tell people like, find a thing, right? Like, if you look at brands that have things, it's especially like shows up in fashion, right? Yeah. If you look at like Gucci, they have the pattern. If you look at Louis Vuitton, I believe it's Louis Vuitton, it's the red bottom heels.
That's Christian Louboutin, but it's close. Yes. My wife has those. That's how I know. Okay.
No, I agree. I'm glad you caught me on that, because being a brand guy.
My wife made me buy one pair of Christian Louboutin men's shoes with spikes and a red bottom, and it cost me $1,000. Yeah. Guess how many times I've worn that? Once. I wish I got a nice coffee machine instead. So, but go ahead.
Well, it has resale value, so maybe it's a collector's, right? Yeah. The point is like they have the red bottom heels. See, our X factor is if you look at the competitors of Rivyl, they're very like clean, minimalistic, and kind of like, like refined and sophisticated. You go to our website, we have like trash bags and rips and like texture. Like it's very different. So like it could be a promise. It could be a reputation. It could be a product. Like it's like try to find something that makes you unique. Third, I think it's very important that it's like as you build your brand, you really have to understand how do we communicate between that sizzle and the target audience. Like what's our strategy? What's our voice? Like how do we speak? How do we connect? How do we resonate with those people? And I think, if you have your sizzle, like, okay, this is the thing we're amazing at, we crush our competitors at this thing, we provide a better service, a better whatever it might be. And then for the consumer, it's like, this is our consumer, this is who they are. Well, like, okay, how do we bridge between the two so that that person cares about the product? It's like, well, how do we speak to them? That's when it goes into like, what do we do on social media? What do we do with our website? So for example, if you take Liquid Death, you're like, okay, well, who's the audience for Liquid Death? Like, in your opinion, who would you say is the audience of Liquid Death?
Well, someone that probably a male, right? And that loves more energetic music, I would say. I'm bad at branding, but you tell me.
Yeah, so I think like people that are really attracted to Liquid Death, they love shock value. They love things that are gnarly and crazy. Maybe they're skateboarders, metalheads. They love going to Burning Man. I don't know, like they're kind of maybe more youthful. They like things that are humorous and silly. So then it's like, okay, well, the product it's just water in a can, right? But what makes that interesting? Well, no one else has really put water in a can and made it fun. Maybe they've got water in a can, but it's tranquil, it's peaceful, it's calming.
How do you market that water in a can is what you're saying to or how do you differentiate?
So they wrap the can with this brand name that says Liquid Death, like a flying skull that's on fire. So like anyone who likes gnarly stuff is like, oh, I can buy water with a skull on it that says Liquid Death. That's cool. That's gnarly. That's the resonance between the product and the consumer. You see what I mean? That voice. So that voice, it could be colors, it could be fonts, it could be visuals, it could be a name, it could be catchphrases and taglines and marketing material.
I'm going to tell you right now, I thought Liquid Death was a band I've heard before, not the drink. So I'll be honest with you and throw that out there. That's cool that they captured that through a label, which is insane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then what's 5?
Yeah. So that's 3. So the first one is, so target consumer, how you speak to them, and like what's your X factor, your specialty, your thing, your promise, right? I think number 4, just to kind of like summarize this, it's really understanding like what's the emotional pull, right? Okay. So like if you think about that tribe member, who do they become when they buy your brands? Right, you got to really think about this. It's like, what's the belief? Like, who do they become?
You could get that back into Rolex. Like, you buy that first Rolex, let's say. Who have you become because you bought a Rolex? Right now, you're in a board meeting. Are you Dain with a Rolex? And how does that make you feel? Right?
Yeah, and I've had friends that have bought a Rolex and their confidence goes through the roof in meetings. I think it's interesting. It's like, well, did the Rolex make them a better person? No, they believed they were more of a person because they bought a product. And this comes back to human nature. It's like we're tribal creatures, right? Yeah. So there's hierarchy and all the rest of it. There's a pecking order in business. So I think psychologically, who do I become if I buy your product? Yeah. I think it's really important to note that. And at the end, I think it's talking about like, what's the big vision above all of it? Like, why all of these things? Like the big why above all of it, right? So Apple was like, we believe in thinking different. So the big arching umbrella above all of those things is like, why? Why is this even a thing? Harley Davidson, it's freedom. Nike, it's the pursuit of greatness, right? So whether it's John Deere tractors, nothing runs like a deer. Like, what's the big point of this brand? And I think if you can nail those 5 things and really build something exciting with those 5 things, that's the core of the onion. Then everything else is just layers. The logo's a layer, the colors are a layer, the fonts are a layer. Like, these are all just additional layers of communication that hold the core of your brand